Alright, so this is a 2001 BMW Z3 Coupe. I have borrowed this for about the last week from a local car club friend of mine. He's out on vacation and couldn't leave this at the airport. He's a flight attendant by trade, and they're only allowed 7 days of free parking, so he needed 10 and asked if I could hold on to the car until he got home. So he will be home tomorrow, and I'm about to drop it back off so he'll have a way to get home once he lands. The story goes, BMW had been making the E36 3 Series, which came out in 1992, 1993. They, at some point, added the 318 Ti, which came out for 1995, and that was the little two-door hatchback that was, intended to appeal to a slightly lower income buyer and slightly younger buyer. When they did that, they also built the Z3 Roadster, which is a two-seat roadster, kind of intended to compete with the Miata, the Boxster, the Audi TT. Obviously it was intended as a little more upscale compared to a 1997 Miata. So they built the Z3 Roadster, and they had the 318 Ti, which shared a platform. But then somewhere in there, BMW's engineers decided to build a coupe version of the Z3. So they took, I guess kind of in foreshadowing to what they're doing today, they took a hatchback, which was effectively the hatchback version of the Roadster, and then built another hatchbacky coupe thing off the same Roadster platform. They built them, and I think it was kind of a difficult process to get the whole car approved. It was one of those kind of pet projects done in a basement, or however you want to phrase it. They conceptualized this thing, they somehow got it greenlit, and they started building them. And this was at the time when they had just brought the E36 M3 to the United States. So they had the S52 six-cylinder, which was 3.2 liter, making 240 horsepower. So they sold these as M coupes, and they put that same engine in them, put some big wide wheels and tires on it. Well, they also sold some non-M versions to people who wanted the fun coupe look without necessarily all that power. So they sold some of them as the 2.8 liter and some as the later 3.0. This car is a 3.0. When the 3.0 came out for, I believe, the 2000 or 2001 model year, BMW also started putting in the S54 six-cylinder, which came out of the E46 M3. And the S54, they detuned it a little bit for this car. I owned one in an E46 M3 for about a year, and it made 333 horsepower according to BMW. They put them in this car making 315 horsepower, but regardless, it was kind of a lot of motor for such a small car with such a unique suspension setup and layout. So the interesting thing about the 318 Ti and these Z3s is that the whole front end of it is an E36 3 Series. As far as suspension layout, as far as parts you'd put on it, they're E36s. The interior is very heavily E36 biased. You'll see a lot of similar design elements. The entire rear of the car, as far as suspension layout is concerned, is an E30. So basically take a 1987 325i rear end, put it in this car, and swap it to be 5-lug wheels instead of 4-lug wheels to match the front, and that's what you got. It's a little more primitive suspension setup. It's certainly not bad. We see a lot of people racing those E30s still with the Spec E30 class in NASA, and they're great cars, but they're not as sophisticated as the E36, and the idea of putting 315 crank horsepower behind an E30 rear end is just hysterical to me. They have a tremendous look from the rear. This is just this big butt, for lack of a better term. You fit big wheels under there, but it's just got a lot of presence. The 3 liter made 225 horsepower. It was sold in the E46 330 around the same time frame. So it made 225 horsepower compared to the S52 M coupes, which made 240 horsepower. So this non-M car is close enough in power to weight to the early M coupe. Doesn't feel quite as raw and raucous all the time. It's a lot more comfortable, cruisery feeling, but plenty of power for how small this car is. The other fun thing with this car, I have a bit of a nostalgic soft spot for the Z3 in coupe or roadster form, because it's the first BMW I drove, and it's the car I learned stick shift on. We had some family friends when I was in high school with my learner's permit, and the husband had a 1990 Miata, and the wife had a 1999 2.8 liter Z3, and they had 3 boys who all learned to drive stick on the Miata, and they were more than willing to let my parents borrow the Miata for the sake of teaching me stick as well, because we didn't own a car with 3 pedals at the time. But my mom and the other lady were out with me one day, and she had driven the Z3, and she just said, hey, why don't we just start this right now? So we stopped in my high school parking lot, and she gave me a few pointers, and then my mom strapped in and gave me a lot more pointers, and they ended up letting me borrow the car once I had my driver's license for 10 days. So here we are many, many years later, and I'm in another Z3, borrowed for 10 days. This time it's got a hardtop and a little bit longer roofline, but kind of the same cool feeling. And even looking now at this car as an adult with a lot more BMW seat time under my belt and a lot of other cars that I've driven behind me, this is just tremendously cool. You sit very low, you sit very far back, the hood goes on forever. So it's interesting coming up to a stoplight here. I remember when I learned how to drive on the green Z3 Roadster, distinctly feeling how difficult the heavy clutch was, and shifting gears was such a process, and how does everyone do this every day? And then when I got the Z3 from this family, when they let me borrow it for 10 days, it had been enough time that had elapsed between when I had learned to drive stick and when they let me borrow it that my dad actually had to back it out of the garage for me and take me on another round of lessons before he would let me take it by myself, because I was so rusty, I was just stalling it left and right. And it's kind of funny now. I have no qualms about driving a stick shift car in stop and go DC traffic, and it's just become second nature. The other nice thing about the Z3 Coupe is that you get a little bit taller roofline kind of bubble compared to the Roadsters that have the soft top. I still can't see, I'm at a red light now, I still can't see stoplights while I'm sitting here, but when I'm sitting upright, this car is a slick top, so it doesn't have a sunroof. Some of these coupes were optioned with a sunroof. I think a lot of the M coupes in particular had this piece of glass above your head, and it looks cool, it brightens up the interior a bit, but having driven the M coupe version, it really cuts into headroom, and I'm tall, I'm 6'2", and I fit very well in this car. I could easily do a long road trip and be comfortable, whereas with the lack of headroom in the Roadster or the M coupe with a sunroof, I think you'd be a little more hard-pressed to find that comfort. So it's interesting with the production numbers of these cars. BMW allegedly made more of the M coupes than they did the 3-liter and 2.8-liter coupes. So just kind of neat driving around in something that's fairly rare. Regardless of production numbers, they definitely sold a lot less of these compared to a normal E36 or E46. And you do get noticed by other drivers of interesting BMWs. You can tell that, the way certain cars are equipped. I got an enthusiastic wave the day I picked this up from a gentleman in a newer F30 3 Series Touring that was a Storal Blue with an M Sport package. It was just kind of fun to be in solidarity, waving and geeking out with each other at a red light about each other's goofy old BMW and goofy newer BMW. And so that's my quick one take on this 2001 BMW Z3 Coupe. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and big thanks to Ben for letting me borrow the car for about 10 days. For more impressions on this car and a few others I've had the chance to drive recently, head on over to outmotorsports.com. And until next time, we'll see you at the track.